Hi guys, welcome back to my channel. I'm Tara Hannon from Blooms and Benedictions, and today we're diving into the story of one of the most famous heroines of the Old Testament. Her name is Hadassah. You're like, who's Hadassah? So that is actually her original Hebrew name that she is going to change to hide her identity and become the savior of her people at that time. So you probably know her by the name of Queen Esther. Points for you if you knew it was Hadassah as well. So when I think of Queen Esther, I can't help but think of that famous movie, One Night with the King. Do you guys remember? It was super exciting for Christians. It was by Tommy Tenney. It came out and it had amazing sets and fabulous costumes and everything was so beautiful. And it was like super hyped up for the Christian world that we were going to have like this epic movie that was made on such a grand scale and all about the story of Queen Esther. It's amazing and it's great for like, especially small children. But if you're expecting like, whoa, really high level acting, maybe like lower some of your expectations because there are some scenes in there that are so comical for me. Like my husband and I always joke about this one scene where King Ahasuerus is having a nightmare and his arms are literally like going like this. He's like, uh. There's like sweat, like pockets, like streaming out of his Adam's apple. Anyway, it's ridiculous and so funny, but communicates a lot of the story of Esther in a really beautiful way and is great for the family. Shameless plug for this movie. I don't even know why, but my point is that that only gives you some of the surface level story of what's going on. And it's actually pitching it as a love story between the king and Esther. And that's really not what was going on. And so I want to explain to you more of the historical context and then give you 6 life lessons that are really going to powerfully impact how you live your life as a woman or man of influence in your sphere today in this post-pandemic world. So the book of Esther is written around 483 to 473 BC, and it's covering this time where the Jews have just been in captivity to the Babylonians, who then get conquered by the Persians. And so we're finding Esther, Hadassah, as she was named as a child, growing up in this culture. She's far from home and they're being raised in this time of diaspora. And so that just means like when the Jewish people are dispersed into other lands and being persecuted. Have we heard that story again and again throughout history, right? And so this is very much a foreshadowing of what will go on multiple times to the Jewish nation, again with Hitler and all of the persecution of World War II. And so we find Hadassah growing up in this culture where she is actually an orphan. Both of her parents have died and they are not even really mentioned. And she's being raised by her cousin Mordecai, who will be an essential figure in this story. And so you kind of get a picture of what life is like during this exile for little Hadassah. She is probably lonely. She is probably feeling out of her comfort zones, not fitting in. She might have identity struggles, but the word does say that she is very beautiful, that she is finely made and beautiful to look at. So she's growing up in this foreign culture that is full of opulence and pagan religions, and she is trying to hold true to her Jewish identity, but there is persecution and it's going to come down hard in a minute. So it's really interesting because the Hebrew meaning of her name Hadassah meant hidden, and the Persian meaning meant star. And so that's exactly what the trajectory of her life is going to be. She's going to come from obscurity, from these humble roots where she is an orphan, she is without parents and identity. She's sort of, marooned in this other culture, growing up and trying to hang on to what she believes. And she's going to become a star, like a radiant beacon of hope for her people. And there's this beautiful verse that we're going to read in a minute. The essence of it is that she has come on the scene for such a time as this. And I want you guys to ask yourself and challenge yourselves as you watch this video, what am I placed in the earth realm at this time to do? Why am I here for such a time as this? Why did I survive a pandemic year? all this crazy stuff that was going down, political upheaval, all of these interracial struggles. Why am I here as a Christian, poised in the position that I am in? Who am I meant to influence? Who am I meant to save and to reach? So the book of Esther is really fascinating because God is not mentioned one time in the original language. So God is not mentioned, but he is not absent. And that's what we need to hang on to as we read this story. When we are asking ourselves in our own personal lives, where is God? Where is his voice? Is he going to speak? Is he going to intervene? We might realize that, oh, I'm in position. He sent me. I am available to do his will. I am his hands and his feet in this time and in this place. And you can realize you are equipped. I am equipped. He has put us on the scene, just as he does with Esther for such a time as this. So if there could be an overarching theme for the book of Esther, it would be that God is moving even when you don't see it, that he is present even when he feels invisible, that he is active even if it is just through his men and women that are doing his work. And so original readers would have noticed this very beautiful thing called a chiastic structure that defines the book of Esther. And all that means is that there's basically like a mirror that's going to happen in the narrative, where you're going to see certain things happen at the beginning, and then there's going to be this central point, and then those things will be mirrored on the end, but with resolution or sort of justification, where everything will be solved and things will be happy and things will be resolved in the end. And so the point of a chiastic structure is for you to focus on that center point. And in the story of Esther, the center point right there in the middle of the story is going to be God's deliverance. And so I just speak that to you, whoever needs that word. You might be at the beginning of your story or near the end, but all throughout, God is present with his deliverance. So we're actually going to find that at the beginning of the story, King Ahasuerus is going to have this lavish feast. So that's going to be like this end of the spectrum. And then there's going to be this dark edict of the bad guy Haman, where he's going to proclaim death for all the Jews. And then right there in the middle is going to be God's deliverance. And then on the other side, we're going to have Mordecai's edict, which is going to be for life and salvation and hope for the Jews. And then finally, on the other side, there's going to be proclaimed another feast, which is going to be the Feast of Purim, which the Jews still celebrate today in honor of Esther. And so that's the chiastic structure, where it starts with a feast, it goes to a dark, like negative, evil proclamation, God's deliverance, a hopeful edict from Mordecai, and then finally Esther's feast, the Feast of Purim. So let's pick it up in chapter 1, where the scene opens on King Ahasuerus and all of his lavish wealth. What's going on in this kingdom? So it's actually going to be a couple decades after Daniel. Have you heard of that guy? A well-known guy, something to do with some lions and a den. So he was actually in captivity with the Babylonians. And so Esther is going to come in that timeline just a couple decades after him, where the Persian Empire has conquered the Babylonians. And so Persia today is actually where modern day Iran is, just to kind of give you some geography. So chapter 1, let's see, verse 4, it says, he showed the riches of his royal glory and the splendor of his pomp, of his greatness for many days, 180 days. He's showing off how wealthy and fancy his life is. Then, when these days were completed, the king gave for all the people present in Susa, the citadel, both great and small, a feast lasting for 7 days in the court of the garden of the king's palace. And so this section's kind of like a who's who about who's being invited to this fancy party. It's kind of like the fancy guys, like the commoners. It's going to mention all of the army and the nobles and the governors and satraps and leaders and people that are in charge, but then also those who are poor. And so he's just kind of saying like, I'm so wealthy. My kingdom is so lavish. I can throw a feast for literally everybody in the garden of my palace. So just fitting them all in. There's marble pillars and fine linen and purple and cotton curtains, which of course at this time, all these things are really elaborate, right? Like violet dyed things. That's like, ooh, high end, because indigo dye is expensive at this time. Cotton and linen is hard to come by. We've got mother of pearl and precious stones, it says in verse 6. And it says, even the drinks were served in golden vessels. And so this feast goes on for 7 days, and the king is getting good and drunk. And when he's at the height of his partying with all of his officials, he decides to call out his queen, Queen Vashti, to come before him. Well, in this culture, it was immodest for the queen to sort of parade her beauty before the people. And so she is actually having a feast in a different area with the women. And so she's in the palace, and he calls her out on the 7th day and basically wants her to parade, some scholars believe, naked before the people. And she's like, what? Like, I don't think so. I'm not just going to like prostitute myself before the visibility of this kingdom just because you're drunk and corrupt, and that's what you want me to do. And so she refuses. And that does not go well. And that's what precipitates this entire search for a new queen. Because of course, King Ahasuerus decides with his cronies that how dare she defy me, right? How dare this woman shame me in front of all these men? And so they come up with this plan where they basically just banish Queen Vashti. She's out of the narrative. You never hear from her again. And so this is the kind of guy that we're dealing with here. He's impetuous. He can be cruel. He's immoral. He's extremely spoiled, very wealthy. He's an improprietous king, right? He's not a good guy. It's going to set the stage for why it was such a brave thing for Esther to have to come before him, because he is all powerful and he could just banish her for any little thing, as it shows here with Queen Vashti. So chapter 2 is going to introduce us to the heroine. Little Hadassah, who I guess she's not so little now, right? She's like a grown-up who's going to become someone very important in this kingdom. But it says in verse 7 that Mordecai was bringing up Hadassah, that is Esther, the daughter of his uncle, for she had neither father nor mother. And so the young woman had a beautiful figure, was lovely to look at, and she gets basically conscripted into this harem for the king. And he's choosing from among these women who he wants to be his next queen. And it says that she keeps advancing among all the other young women. She gets to the best place in the harem. But it says in verse 10, Esther had not made known her people or kindred, for Mordecai had commanded her not to make it known. And so in the end, the king is going to choose her. And it says in verse 17, the king loved Esther more than all the other women. Yay! So now she's basically being elevated to the new queen. And again, this isn't like, yay, super love story with this really honorable man. She's doing this for the salvation of her people. And she's getting into this position because the Lord is pulling all the strings behind the scenes, right? We may think that these things are coincidental, but he's always in charge and he always has a plan. So chapter 3 is going to bring on the scene Haman. He is the bad guy of the story. He is definitely like a Hitler figure. He is a precursor to that tragedy in our human history. And it says in verse 6 that Haman sought to destroy all the Jews, the people of Mordecai, throughout the whole kingdom of Ahasuerus. And so this is all prompted by him noticing that Mordecai, who is growing in favor with the king, is kind of like an advisor to the king. And Haman doesn't like that. And he notices that Mordecai is not bowing down to the king. And if that's not reminiscent of a story that we've heard before, right? Hashtag Shadrach, Meshach, Abednego. And they wouldn't, bow down to this idol, right? Well, Mordecai feels the same way. He doesn't pay homage. And they're like, why are you transgressing this king's command? But Mordecai is staying honorable to what he should stand for and what he believes in, and Haman's not having it. And so he hatches this plan, and he's basically going to annihilate all of the Jews, and he gets the king's stamp of approval, which is like, hey man, are you like even paying attention? Do you even know what's going on? And he's just like, in verse 9, if it please the king, let it be decreed that they be destroyed. And he's just like, okay, the money is given to you. The people also do with them as it seems good to you. And so he's like, like hatching my plan. I'm going to build a gallows and I'm going to hang Mordecai on it. And he just can't wait to see the downfall of this people that he hates, right? Because they're foreigners and they don't obey all the laws of the land, and they don't worship the same gods, and they don't respect the king in the way that he thinks they should. And so this plan is made known to Esther in chapter 4. And this is the really powerful part here, picking it up in verse 12. It says, and they told Mordecai what Esther had said, and Mordecai told them to reply to Esther, do not think to yourself that in the king's palace you will escape any more than any of all the other Jews. It says, for if you keep silent at this time, relief and deliverance will rise for the Jews from another place. The Lord always has salvation at his heart, right? He will raise someone up to bring about justification and salvation for his people. So even if we step out of alignment and we aren't obedient, it doesn't mean that his will not go forward. It will happen. But it says that you can participate in that. You can be a part of his plan if you are obedient. And so he's saying, like, salvation and deliverance will arise from another place, but you and your father's house will perish. And who knows whether you have not come to the kingdom for such a time as this. You also have come to the earth for such a time as this. Ask yourself, what does the Lord want me to do with this limited pocket of time that I have been granted? Be obedient. Amen. Verse 15, it says, then Esther told them to reply to Mordecai, gather all the Jews to be found in Susa, hold a fast on my behalf. Whenever you're getting ready to do something brave, you better be praying, right? Hold a fast. That's what fasting is for, fasting and praying. And then she says, I will go to the king, though it is against the law, and if I perish, I perish. And so look at this beautiful bravery that Esther is stepping into her destiny and saying, I will be obedient, even unto death. So far in the story, the king has made some major blunders, right? He's banished his first queen just out of like wounded pride. He's chosen a second queen out of lustful, like, oh, she's so beautiful. And obviously Esther had other merits to her, personhood, but it shows you that God is working through human circumstances and poor decisions. So even though the king is making bad choices and just sort of like taking his hands off the wheel and letting Haman run amok, God is working through all the circumstances. And we have to remember that. Even when it seems coincidental, he is on the move. So here in chapter 5, we're going to find Esther doing the bravest thing of her life, which is entering into the courtroom of the king uninvited. At this time, if you were uninvited, you could be instantly put to death. But she puts on her royal robes. She knows that she has favor with him. She knows that he thinks she's pretty. So there's that working in her favor. And she shows up in chapter 5. And it says, when the king saw Esther standing in the court, she won favor in his sight. Not just because she was beautiful, but because she was appointed of God. God was pulling all the strings and orchestrating this moment, right? She was a woman of integrity, and it was her inner beauty that was more impactful than her outer beauty. She was doing a brave thing to save her people. So he holds out the tip of his scepter to her. And in verse 3, it says, what is it, Queen Esther? What is your request? It shall be given you even up to the half of my kingdom. And so all she asks for is for a banquet, a feast that she wants to have with the king and with Haman, because she wants to reveal all the dirty deeds that Haman's been doing, sneaking around, and the king isn't fully aware of what's going on. And so he agrees, and he's going to go to this feast. And so right before the feast, Haman has the gallows built. Remember, he wants to build a gallows on which to hang Mordecai. And look how the Lord is moving. At the beginning of chapter 6, it says, "On that night, the king could not sleep." The Lord will keep even a pagan king, a heathen, awake in his nightmares, right? Remember? I can't sleep because they're going to kill this guy Mordecai. That wasn't coincidental. That was the Lord giving him nightmares. And so the king says, "Give orders to bring the book of memorable deeds, the Chronicles," and they were read before the king. And it was found how Mordecai had done all these honorable things. And so right before this feast, where Haman is about to murder all these people, the Lord is implanting sort of like supernatural knowledge, things that are known in the natural from books and different records, but he's prompting the king to go back and to remember them and to read them. And so it's going to be fresh in his mind when he goes to dinner with this bad guy the next night. And so they do that. In chapter 7, Esther is going to reveal Haman's plot. And she answers the king and says, "If I found favor in your sight, O king, and if it pleases you, then let my life be granted me for my wish and my people for my request. For we have been sold, I and my people, to be destroyed, to be killed, and to be annihilated. If we had been sold merely as slaves, men and women, I would have been silent, for our affliction is not to be compared with the loss of the king." Then King Ahasuerus said to Queen Esther, "Who is he and where is he who has dared to do this?" And Esther said, "A foe and an enemy, that guy that's sitting right next to you at this dinner." Wicked Haman, right? And she like spins her necklace around and there's a Star of David and she's like, "Dun, dun, dun, I'm also Jewish and these are my people and I love them and the Lord is working salvation on their behalf through me, and this is not a coincidence. It's not a coincidence that you couldn't sleep last night and you read all about Mordecai and what an honorable guy he is. It's not a coincidence that you chose a Jewish woman who is actually named Hadassah to be the queen of your kingdom, and the people are saved." And so chapter 8 and 9 is going to be just the resolution of the story and how Haman actually dies on the gallows that he built for someone else. Don't ever be too greedy for someone else's punishment, right? Because you never know what is coming your way for your own dark deeds. And so the Jews actually destroy their enemies, and Haman dies. And it says the Jews gained mastery over those who hated them. That's chapter 9, verse 1. And then the Feast of Purim is inaugurated, and it is in honor of Esther. And it's such a beautiful story. She continues to be the queen of the kingdom. And in all of this, the relationship between her and Mordecai is continued to be established. And it says at the very end of the story in chapter 10 that King Ahasuerus gets the full account of the high honor of Mordecai. And the king has advanced him. And it says, "For Mordecai the Jew was second in rank to King Ahasuerus, and he was great among the Jews and popular with the multitude of his brothers, for he sought the welfare of his people and spoke peace to all his people." Do you see all of these biblical foreshadowings? Do you see all of these parallels and archetypes? Who else becomes second in command and is popular with all his brothers? Hashtag Joseph. Remember that guy? Technicolor coat? That'll be another Bible study. But there's so many beautiful parallels. You see that Esther is like an archetype even for Christ, who will be coming for the final salvation of his people. And he will bravely do that difficult thing that he says, Father, if there is any other way, take this cup from me, but not my will, but your will. And that's what Esther says as well. Like, she doesn't want to do this, but Mordecai challenges her. You might be the only hope. And what if that is the exact reason that you have been born at this time? Ask yourselves, friends, why have I been born at this time? Let's close with 6 life lessons. Number 1, let the obstacles of your past become stepping stones rather than excuses. Number 2, when you face really hard choices, angels don't just hum in the background. You act in the physical world, and God leads in the spiritual world. Number 3, aim to live for something outside of yourself, moving past self-preservation into sacrificial living. Number 4, honoring others is a heart condition. It has nothing to do with a person's power or position. Number 5, acknowledge that God works in both the miraculous and supernatural, as well as the mundane, in human initiative, and the seemingly coincidental. And finally, number 6, God can flip things upside down on the very day that you might be destined for destruction. I'm Tara Hannon from Blooms and Benedictions, where we walk with Christ to find the roses among the thorns. We find the beauty in the midst of pain. Ask yourself this week, how can I be faithful in the mundane places? God has you positioned right where he needs you, friend. I love you so much, and I'll see you next time. God bless.